When I was younger, there was a ruined building at the bottom of our street. All of the kids in the area kept well away from it because the rumor was that it was haunted. The concrete walls of the old two-story building were cracked and crumbling. The windows were broken and shards of glass lay all over the floor inside. One evening, as a test of courage, my best friend and I decided to explore the creepy old place. We climbed in through a window at the back of the building. The whole place was dirty, and there was a layer of mud on the wooden floor. As we dusted ourselves off, we looked up and were shocked to see that someone had written the words, "I am dead," on the wall near the ceiling. "Probably just some teenagers trying to scare kids," I said. "Yeah, probably," replied my friend nervously. We explored more of the rooms on the ground floor. In a room that appeared to have once been a kitchen of sorts, we found more writing on the wall. It read, "I am in a room upstairs." We walked up the creaking stairs to the second floor. I led the way and my friend followed close behind. I wasn't scared, but he was beginning to get a little jittery. When we came to the top of the stairs, we turned left and walked cautiously down the narrow hallway. At the end of the hallway was a closed door with some more ominous writing on it. "You will find me in this room." By now, my friend was shaking with fear. I was quite creeped out too, but I didn't want to show it. He told me he didn't want to go any further, but I insisted, telling him there was nothing to be afraid of. I turned the handle and the door creaked open. We stepped into the room and found it empty. There were two closed doors on either side. There was more creepy writing on the wall. It read, "My head is on the left and my body is on the right." As soon as my friend saw this, he completely lost his nerve. He gave a yelp and turned to run away. I caught hold of his arm, but he shook me off and fled out through the open door. I heard his footsteps disappearing off down the hallway. I held my ground. I was determined to be brave and overcome my fear. Mustering all my courage, I opened the door on the right and walked inside. I walked to the other side of the room, and on the wall, written in tiny letters, were the words, "My body is underneath." I looked down at the floor. I was standing on some more writing on the floorboards. I stepped back and saw the words, "My head is coming from the room behind you. Turn around." I heard the door behind me creaking and quickly turned. There was a shadow moving behind the door. Suddenly, something rolled into the room and came to a rest against the wall. It was my friend's severed head. His dead, sightless eyes seemed to stare at me. Screaming in horror, I flung myself out through the open window and fell 2 stories to the ground. I landed on my side, breaking my arm. In horrible pain, I ran home, crying and yelling for my parents. The police were called and they searched the old ruined building. At first, they didn't find anything. There wasn't even any writing on the wall. They combed the house from top to bottom, but didn't find any traces of my friend. Then they pried up the floorboards. His body was lying underneath. They never found his head. A man was injured in a car accident and had to stay at home for a few weeks until he recovered. His wife was working and wasn't able to take care of him. It was too painful for him to go outside, so he had to spend most of his time in the apartment. For first couple of days, it was easy. He had a lot of things to do. But after a few days had passed, he became very bored. One day he was watching TV when he happened to hear footsteps and children's voices coming from the apartment above him. He wondered why the children were home, because the schools were not on holidays yet. The next day, he heard the same footsteps and children's voices. It sounded like there were 2 children playing. The next day, the man grew even more bored and didn't feel like cooking lunch for himself. Instead, he ordered a pizza delivery. As it turned out, he ordered too much, and when he finished eating, there was still 1 whole pizza lying untouched on the kitchen table. He remembered that there were some children living in the apartment above him, so he decided that they may like a free pizza. Upstairs and willing to do something kind, he decided to take the pizza to them. The man had never met the family who lived in the upstairs apartment, but he rang the doorbell anyway. There was no answer, even though he heard someone moving about inside. He rang the bell again and noticed that someone was peering at him through the peephole. "Who is it?" called a faint woman's voice from behind the door. The man explained that he lived in the apartment below and had some leftover pizza left from lunch, and wondered if the family wanted it. The door opened slightly, and the man could see part of the woman's face through the gap. He noticed that it looked unusually dark inside the apartment. "Thanks, but we don't want any," said the woman coldly. "Maybe your children would like it," replied the man. As soon as he said this, 2 children's faces lined up below the woman's face. The door was open still, just a crack. The children stared at him. The 3 faces were forming a line. "Okay, give it to me then," said the woman. A hand reached out through the gap and snatched the pizza box. The man just stood there. The 3 faces were still staring at him. Then the door slammed shut and he walked away. Something was bothering him. He felt a chill run down his spine. The image of the 3 faces was burned into his mind. He walked faster and reached the elevator. The faces were forming a line, he thought to himself. He pressed the button and waited for the elevator to arrive, forming a line vertically, one on top of the other. He pressed the button again and again, but the lift still did not come. Something was seriously wrong. The faces... He began quickly walking down the stairs. Faces lined up on top of each other. That's impossible. He frantically ran down the stairs. No bodies. Finally, he reached his apartment door. Just hands holding up the heads. Safely inside his apartment, the man picked up the phone and called the police. He tried to explain what he had seen. When the police arrived, they searched the apartment upstairs and found the bodies of the woman and her 2 children lying in the bathtub. Their heads were missing. They had been decapitated with a saw. According to the autopsy, they had been dead for 3 days. The police found the woman's husband hiding in a wardrobe. His hands were covered in blood, and he had gone completely insane. He kept trying to convince the police officers that his wife and kids were still alive. They found an uneaten pizza sitting on the kitchen table. A few months ago, my friend Yoko and I went to a girl's house for a sleepover. I didn't know the girl very well. Her name was Emmy, and she was a friend of Yoko's. They went to the same school when they were kids. Emmy was a strange girl. She was very quiet and seldom said anything. Her parents went out for the night and we were left alone in the house. We got changed into our pajamas and sat around trying to tell ghost stories. The problem was, we didn't know very many, and the ones we knew were kind of lame. All of a sudden, Emmy perked up. "I know a good website," she said. She opened up her laptop and clicked on one of the bookmarks. We gathered around her and looked at the website. It had a lot of scary stories from all over the world, including Japan. Emmy scrolled down the page while we stared at the monitor. Yoko pointed to one of the stories. "What's this one?" she asked. For a moment, Emmy's face changed to a serious frown. "You're not supposed to read that one," she said. "It's dangerous." "This whole website is creepy," I said. "Is this supposed to be for kids?" asked Yoko. "No," Emmy replied in a serious tone. "It's definitely not for kids. Some of the stories and games are really dangerous, like this one." She clicked on the link for one story. It seemed very strange. There was a picture of a woman with long dark hair, but her face was disturbing. It made me sick to look at it. The text said, "The person who wrote this story is not human." "You're not supposed to listen to this story," said Emmy. "So let's not listen," replied Yoko. "Yeah, let's just go to bed," I said. I had a strange feeling about this site. I mean, where did they get all these weird stories from, and why did they collect them? Who would even make a site like this? There was something very unsettling about the whole thing. Emmy didn't take any notice of us. She pressed play on the video, and we heard the start of the story. As soon as I heard that weird voice, it freaked me out. I put my hands over my ears and left the room. Yoko followed me. We waited in the bathroom until it was over. I can't remember what the story was about, but I do recall that it was very short. It seemed more like a poem than a story, but it didn't rhyme. When we came back in, Emmy had a strange look on her face. "See, nothing happened," she said. Not long after that, we decided to go to bed. We were very sleepy. Emmy got into her bed and I lay down on the futon beside Yoko. We turned off the lights and went to sleep. I always have trouble sleeping when I stay in someone else's house. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by a strange sound. After a minute or so, I realized it was Emmy. She was making small noises in her sleep like, hmm. It sounded as if she was having a bad dream. I shook Yoko to wake her up. Maybe Emmy shouldn't have read that story before going to bed, she mumbled. I tried to go back to sleep, but Emmy's moans became louder. Then she started talking in her sleep. How did you find? She muttered. I nudged Yoko, and we both lay there listening to her. How did you know? She muttered. I do not think sleep talking very tone, that was clearly, I said. You are facing over there still, but I thought Kana happened already, is Yoko. Must be a weird nightmare, said Yoko. Just as she said that, Emmy suddenly got up out of bed. The way she moved was jerky, like a puppet. When I saw that, a cold chill ran down my spine. Emmy had her back to us and her head was hanging down, her long black hair WS covering her face. She just stood there, facing her bed, moaning softly. Slowly, very slowly, she began to turn around. Just then, Yoko flew into a panic. That's not Emmy, she hissed. Emmy was still slowly turning. Yoko was staring at Emmy, her eyes wide in fright. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't turn away. I was trembling uncontrollably. In the dim light, I could make out Emmy's face as she turned. It was Emmy's face, but somehow it wasn't. Her skin was pale and her eyes bugged out abnormally. Her mouth was distorted and twisted into an evil grimace. It wasn't Emmy. It was as if her face had been mixed with the face of someone else, as if someone else was pretending to Emmy. In a voice that didn't sound human, she whispered, I want to know how... I don't remember what happened after that. I think Yoko and I passed out. When I woke up, it was morning. Yoko was lying on the futon beside me, but in the bed, there was just a discarded pair of pajamas. There was no sign of Emmy anywhere. We went downstairs, but the house was empty. We were really freaked out, and the events of the night before were fresh in our minds. Yoko and I grabbed our bags and left as fast as we could. We tried call Emmy on her mobile, but it was out of range. We tried again and again that afternoon, but it was always out of range. Later that evening, we called her home phone number and her mom answered. She said she didn't know where Emmy was either. Yoko and I became more and more scared. We texted all of our friends, but none of them had heard from Emmy. It was like she had dropped off the face of the earth. Emmy's parents went to the police and filed a missing persons report. They started a search for Emmy. Most people thought she had run away from home. Nobody could find any trace of her. The police came to question myself and Yoko, but there was nothing much we could tell them. We both knew Emmy didn't run away from home. One day, Yoko came over to my house. We got on my laptop and searched the internet for the scary website Emmy had been reading. With trembling fingers, Yoko clicked on the link. A notice came up on the screen. This story has been removed, it read. Do not try to find this scary story. It is too dangerous. We searched through the site, but we couldn't find it. Ever since then, I've had trouble sleeping. I'm scared that when I wake up, I won't be here anymore. There was a young girl named Alicia who moved with her parents to a new town. They rented a big old house that was sparsely furnished. Alicia slept in the downstairs bedroom while her parents slept upstairs. After they had been living there a few weeks, Alicia's parents noticed that she was growing very thin. As the days went on, her health seemed to get worse and worse. Then, the poor girl came down with a mysterious illness and was confined to her bed. The doctor came to examine her, and he told her parents that she was suffering from anemia. All she needed was some rest, he said, and soon she would be as good as new. However, despite what the doctor said, Alicia's condition continued to get worse and worse. Her skin was gray and pallid, her cheeks were sunken, and there were dark circles around her eyes. Her parents were distraught and had no idea what to do. While Alicia slept in her bed, her mother and father paced back and forth restlessly, wondering what could be the cause of her mysterious illness. Day by day and hour by hour, the poor girl grew worse and worse. She was so weak she could barely move. Alicia was fading fast, and the life was ebbing from her veins. She was deathly pale, and her body was shriveled and withered. She started to have hallucinations and began screaming out in terror and babbling incoherently in a weak voice. Finally, Alicia lost consciousness and died. Her parents were inconsolable. They held a funeral service and buried their beloved daughter in the town cemetery. The day after the funeral, Alicia's mother was stripping the sheets off her daughter's bed when she noticed something on the pillow. There were 2 red stains in the white material. When she picked up the pillow, she noticed it was unusually heavy, so she called her husband to come and take a look at it. As the parents examined the pillow closely, the mother suddenly let out a scream. She felt something moving inside it. The father fetched a knife and slit open the pillow, emptying the feathers out on the floor. As the parents watched in horror, something crawled out of the pile of feathers, slowly moving its hairy legs. It was a monstrous black spider, so swollen with blood that they could scarcely make out its mouth. Night after night, as Alicia lay in bed, this hairy abomination had been stealthily sucking all of the blood from her body and slowly draining her life away. One evening, a woman came home late from work. She put her handbag down on the kitchen table and started rooting through it. Then she realized she didn't have her mobile phone with her. She couldn't remember the last time she had it. "I must have lost it on the way home," she thought to herself. She went into the hallway, picked up her home phone and dialed the number of her mobile. The phone rang for a long time, and then someone picked up, but they didn't say anything. "Hello?" said the woman. There was no answer, but she could hear someone breathing on the other end. "Hello? Can you hear me?" she said. There was still no answer, but the breathing got heavier. "Hello? Can you hear me?" the woman asked again. Then, in a low voice, the person on the other end said, "I hear you." Then, they hung up. After that, the woman kept calling her mobile, but nobody picked up. Eventually, she gave up in frustration. It was late, and she decided to go to bed. When she went upstairs to her bedroom, she was shocked to see her mobile phone sitting on the nightstand. It was on silent. Through the eyes of a child, the world is very different. Every child has a fear of what is lurking under their bed. They fear what is hiding in the closet or peeping in at them through the little crack in a door that's standing ajar. A doctor would tell you that children are much more perceptive than adults. Their eyes are able to see the things that an adult's eyes cannot see. When you grow up, you become blind to the dangers that creep and crawl through the darkness. Children can see what is truly there. They see the monsters. If you were to look, for just one night, through a child's eyes, you would know what true fear really is. If you were able to see again the things you only dimly remember from your childhood, imagine how terrifying that would be. Can you remember those sleepless nights, burrowing under your covers, shaking and shivering in the darkness, afraid to move, afraid to make a sound, afraid to breathe? Those are the nights that adults forget. The nights when you would cover yourself completely with your blankets so that the monsters couldn't see you. The nights when you would hold your breath so the monsters couldn't hear you. The nights when you would lie as still as possible so you wouldn't attract their attention. I know you remember those nights. The only thing that would protect you was light. Bright light. You slept with the light on. That made it safe. That meant they couldn't get you. Teenagers are caught in the middle. They still sense that something is there in the darkness, but they try to convince themselves it's just their imagination. They're embarrassed to sleep with the light on. Teenagers have forgotten that light is the only thing that can keep them away. While you're sitting there in front of your computer, do you think that the light from your monitor will be enough to keep them away? Sorry, it's not. Now look behind you with a child's eyes and try not to scream.